I never had what you'd call a loving relationship with my family. Growing up on a farm in rural Missouri, I felt like I didn't quite fit in, like I'd been planted in the wrong soil. Our family was small but tight-knit, in the way that keeps secrets locked and traditions alive. My parents, my older sister Olivia, and my grandmother. Out of all of them, the only person who treated me with some semblance of kindness was Olivia. But let's be honest, even that was a stretch. We weren't close, but she didn't go out of her way to belittle me like the others did. Looking back, I think the problem was my appearance. I was born with vitiligo, and my family was obsessed with appearances. Picture this: tall, blonde, radiant people who looked like they belonged on a magazine cover. And then there was me, the blemish on the family portrait. I'll never forget the jokes and comments about how I must have been a mistake. God must have meant to make you a cow, not a human, they'd laugh, comparing my discolored patches to the cows we raised. The words stuck with me, weighing heavily on my young heart. It's no surprise that I became hyper-aware of how I looked. School wasn't much better. Kids can be cruel, but I never imagined my worst bullies would be at home. By the time I was a teenager, I tried to defend myself. I'd snap back at their comments, only to be told I was too sensitive. "We're just joking," they'd say, but those jokes never felt like humor to me. They were jabs wrapped in laughter, and they left bruises that never faded. Leaving for college was my escape. I chose a school far from home, determined to start over. No more cow jokes, no more pitying glances from neighbors, just me figuring out who I was outside of that toxic bubble. College was everything I needed. It wasn't just an escape from the farm, it was a chance to finally breathe. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the weird-looking farm girl. People here didn't stare at my vitiligo like I was some kind of sideshow attraction. They saw me. And let me tell you, that freedom, it felt damn good. I threw myself into my studies and made friends who didn't judge me based on my looks. It was like I'd been given a reset button on life. I could wear what I wanted, style my hair how I liked, and walk around without that constant anxiety of who was going to make a comment about my skin. Sure, I still had my insecurities. I probably always will. But at least I wasn't surrounded by people who fueled them every day. And then there was Jacob. I met him during my first year. We sat next to each other in a lecture hall, both of us half asleep during a boring intro class. He cracked some joke under his breath, and I laughed before I could stop myself. I guess that's where it all started. We didn't officially start dating until the end of our second year, but by then, I already knew he was special. Jacob made me feel like I was more than my skin, more than the insecurities my family had drilled into me. He saw me for who I really was. Smart, funny, kind, and dare I say it, beautiful in my own way. Being with him was like peeling away the layers of doubt and shame I'd carried for years. That's why the thought of going back home terrified me. Even though I'd managed to keep my distance for most of college, I still had to go back occasionally, for holidays, or, in one particular case, for Olivia's wedding. It was my final year, and I figured, what's the worst that could happen? I'd introduce Jacob to my family when we came back for Christmas, and maybe, just maybe, they'd surprise me and be decent people for once. Spoiler alert, they didn't. The wedding was going fine until one of my uncles decided to tease me. You know the classic wedding banter, "You're next," and all that nonsense. I was used to shrugging those comments off, but then my grandmother chimed in with a gem that hit me right in the gut. "Her? Married? Oh, please. With that face?" And just like that, my parents burst out laughing, like she'd told the funniest joke in the world. I stood there, frozen, trying to act like it didn't bother me, but it did. God, it hurt more than anything they'd ever said before. Maybe because I'd started to believe I was past caring what they thought. Maybe because I'd finally found someone who loved me, and hearing that kind of cruelty again knocked me back to square one. I left that wedding with one thing on my mind. I'm done. I wasn't going to put myself through that anymore. After I graduated, I was cutting ties with them for good. No more just jokes. No more pretending everything was fine. They weren't going to be part of my life, my happiness, or my future with Jacob. After Olivia's wedding, I couldn't shake that moment from my mind. My grandmother's words echoed in my head, over and over again. With that face? It wasn't even the first time I'd heard something like that, but for some reason, that day felt like the last straw. When I got back to school, I told Jacob everything. He already knew bits and pieces about my family, the toxic comments, the jokes that weren't really jokes, but now he had the full picture. He was quiet for a while, just letting me vent. And when I finally stopped, he said, "You don't owe them anything, you know." And he was right, so I made a plan. After graduation, I was done. No more visits. No more calls. No more pretending. They didn't deserve to be part of my life. And I wasn't going to let them ruin my happiness with Jacob. Still, when graduation day came, I invited them out of politeness. Honestly, I didn't expect them to show up, but they did. My parents and Olivia came, looking all polished and proud, as if they'd been the most supportive family in the world. It made me sick to my stomach. After the ceremony, I introduced them to Jacob. He shook their hands, polite as ever, but I could see it in their faces. They were shocked that someone as normal as Jacob would want to be with me. They didn't even bother to hide it. "Is this your boyfriend?" my dad asked, like he couldn't believe it. "Yes," I said, locking eyes with him. "Jacob is my boyfriend, and after graduation, we're moving in together." That's when I dropped the bomb. I thanked them for paying for my college expenses and told them I'd pay them back as soon as I could. Then I told them I wasn't coming back to the farm. You should have seen their faces. My dad's jaw tightened, and my mom gave me that disapproving look I'd seen my whole life. "So what? You think you're too good for us now?" "It's not that," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I just like my life here better. I've made friends. I've built something for myself. And I'm happy. For the first time, I'm happy." They didn't like that answer. They left without much of a goodbye, and I was relieved. It felt like cutting the final cord. For the next couple of years, things were peaceful. Jacob and I moved in together, and his parents even helped us with rent until we found stable jobs. Life was good. Then, earlier this year, Jacob proposed. It wasn't a flashy proposal or anything. It was simple, sweet, and perfect for us. We were sitting on the couch, watching one of our favorite shows, when he turned to me and said, "You know, I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" I laughed at first, thinking he was joking, but when I saw the serious look in his eyes, my heart just about burst. "Yes," I said without hesitation. 1,000,000 times yes. We started planning the wedding right away. Invitations went out, and everything was falling into place. I sent one to Olivia and her husband, but I didn't invite my parents or my grandmother. The way I saw it, they had no place at my wedding. Why would I want people there who made me feel worthless my whole life? I thought they'd take the hint, but apparently not. About a week after Olivia got her invitation, my mom called me. I could already hear the irritation in her voice before she even spoke. "We haven't received our invitation yet," she said, as if there'd been some mistake. "There wasn't a mistake," I said calmly. "You're not invited." There was a long pause on the other end. Then came the yelling. She called me ungrateful, said I was disrespecting the family, that I thought I was too good for them because I didn't want to take over the farm. I just let her rant, waiting for her to run out of steam. When she finally did, I told her the truth. "I'm not inviting you because of how you treated me my whole life," I said. "You made fun of me. You made me feel ugly and unwanted. And I don't want that kind of energy anywhere near me on my wedding day." She tried to brush it off as usual. "Those were just jokes. You're being too sensitive." But I wasn't having it this time. "Well, that's how it is," I said. "You're not invited, and I don't want you in my life." Then I hung up and blocked her. For the first time, I felt free. I thought that was the end of it. After I blocked my mom and dad, I figured they'd get the message and move on. But clearly, I gave them too much credit. A few days later, my sister Olivia called me. Now, Olivia had always been the quiet one when it came to family drama. She'd stay out of it, never really picking sides. So when she called, I assumed she was checking in, maybe trying to smooth things over. But nope. She started with, "Hey, I know you're upset, but we need to talk about this wedding thing." I rolled my eyes. "Liv, I've already made my decision. They're not invited. End of story." "I get that," she said, her voice hesitant. But there's something you don't know. That caught my attention. What do you mean? There was a long pause before she finally said, Mom has lung cancer, stage 2. She found out a few weeks ago and, well, it's her last wish to see you get married. I sat there, stunned. I wasn't expecting that. My mom? Sick? Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked. They didn't want to stress you out, Olivia said softly. You've been busy planning the wedding, and they thought it would just ruin things. I didn't know what to say. A part of me felt guilty, like maybe I'd been too harsh. How do you hold a grudge against someone who's dying? But then, another part of me, the part that had been hurt and humiliated for years, felt suspicious. Why are you telling me now? I asked. Because you need to fix things before it's too late, she said. You'll regret it if you don't. Trust me. I hung up the phone feeling like my head was spinning. Suddenly everything was blurry. Was I being too stubborn? Was I the bad guy for not inviting my mom, knowing what I knew now? I called Jacob, desperate for some clarity. As soon as he picked up, I spilled everything. He listened patiently, and when I was done, he said something that stopped me in my tracks. Are you sure they're telling the truth? I blinked. Why would they lie about something like that? Think about it, he said gently. They've done nothing but hurt you your whole life. And now, suddenly, right when they're not invited to your wedding, they drop this cancer story? Doesn't that seem convenient? He had a point. I hated to admit it, but he was right. I'd been so emotional that I hadn't even considered the possibility that they were lying. But now, the seed of doubt was planted. I didn't know who to talk to. Olivia made it clear that only a few people in the family supposedly knew about my mom's diagnosis. So I decided to call someone I trusted, my mom's youngest sister, Aunt Claire. Aunt Claire had always been the black sheep of the family, like me. She was the only one who really helped me when I first moved out, and I knew she wasn't one to sugarcoat things. If anyone would give me the truth, it was her. When I told her what Olivia had said, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Claire? I prompted. She sighed. I've been debating whether or not to tell you this, but since you called me first, I'm not going to lie to you. My heart started pounding. They're not being honest, she said bluntly. There's no cancer. Your mom made that up after she realized she wasn't getting an invitation. She told me herself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Wait. What? She was furious when she found out you invited Olivia but not her, Claire continued. She told me she wasn't going to let it go. Then, when that didn't work, she said, Fine. If she won't invite us, we'll tell her I'm sick. She'll fall for it. She's too soft. It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. She said that? I whispered. Yes, Claire said firmly. She and your grandmother have been planning this for weeks. And from what I gathered, they were hoping you'd invite them out of pity. Once they were at the wedding, they planned to make sure you never forgot that day. It was so cruel, so manipulative, that I felt sick to my stomach. Why are they like this? I muttered, more to myself than to her. I don't know, sweetheart, Claire said softly. But I'm glad you called me. You deserve to know the truth. I thanked her, hung up, and immediately called Jacob back. You were right, I said, my voice shaking. They lied. There's no cancer. It was all a ploy to get invited. Jacob sighed. I'm sorry, babe. I know that hurts to hear. But now I was angry. Angry that they would stoop that low. Angry that Olivia played along with it. And angry at myself for almost falling for it. Jacob and I decided to set the record straight. I made a social media post explaining everything. I didn't go into all the ugly details, but I made it clear that the reason my parents weren't invited wasn't because I thought I was too good for them, but because of how they'd treated me my whole life. After that, I blocked Olivia too. I even sent her a text before I did. I know you were part of this, and I don't want you at my wedding anymore. Invitation revoked. It felt harsh, but it had to be done. Jacob and I finally felt a sense of relief. But, of course, it wasn't over. Not yet. I thought things were settled after I blocked Olivia and posted my side of the story online. For a few days, it was quiet. No calls, no texts, no drama. Jacob and I were finally able to focus on the wedding and just breathe. But of course, my family couldn't leave well enough alone. One evening, I got a text from my grandmother's phone number. I hadn't blocked it because, honestly, I'd forgotten she even knew how to text. The message, however, wasn't from her. It was from my mom. "It doesn't matter what lies you post online," she wrote. "You won't be happy without our blessing. You're still my daughter, and you'll regret this. Fix it while you still can." I was furious. It wasn't even what she said. It was the nerve of her still trying to manipulate me after everything. Without thinking, I shot back a response that came straight from my heart, no filter. "I wish you really did have cancer," I texted, "because then maybe I wouldn't have to deal with you much longer." As soon as I hit send, I regretted it. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because I knew she'd twist it somehow. And of course she did. Within an hour, I started getting messages from family members. My mom had posted a screenshot of my text on social media. She framed it as proof that I was a heartless, cruel daughter who wished death upon her own mother. Half the family was horrified by my message. The other half, the ones who knew how my parents really were, stood by me. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling a mix of guilt and rage. Jacob put his hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to explain yourself to anyone," he said. "But I still feel bad," I admitted. "I hate that they pushed me to that point. I don't want to be the kind of person who says stuff like that." "You're not," he said firmly. "They provoked you, and honestly, they deserved it." Despite his reassurance, I couldn't shake the guilt. I knew I needed to talk to someone outside of the situation, someone who understood both sides. So I called Aunt Claire again. When I told her what happened, she sighed deeply. "Sweetheart, you've been holding in years of hurt. It was bound to come out eventually. Don't beat yourself up over it." "I just don't want to be like them," I said quietly. "You're nothing like them," she assured me. "You've spent your whole life trying to rise above their cruelty. One angry text doesn't change that." I thanked her and hung up, feeling a little lighter, but the peace didn't last long. About a week before the wedding, Aunt Claire showed up at my house. She looked nervous, and my stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" I asked. "They're here," she said, her voice low. "Who's here?" "Your parents, and your grandmother." I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "Wait, what?" "They flew in last night," she explained. "They're staying at a hotel nearby, but they convinced me to let them stay at my house for a few days." My jaw dropped. "Why would you let them do that?" She looked embarrassed. "I tried to say no, but they cornered me, and, well, you know how they are." I shook my head, frustrated but not surprised. "So, what's their plan? Do they think they can just show up at my wedding?" Claire nodded. "They were planning to confront you right before the ceremony. I thought you should know." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Thank you for telling me, but I'm not going to let them ruin my day." Jacob and I decided to deal with it head-on. We drove to Claire's house that same day. I wasn't going to wait for them to make a scene at my wedding. I'd confront them now and end it once and for all. When we arrived, my mom, dad, and grandmother were sitting in Claire's living room. The moment I walked in, my mom's face twisted in shock. "You!" she snapped, turning to Claire. "You told her?" Claire crossed her arms. "I'm not going to lie for you." Before they could turn on her, I stepped forward. "This ends now," I said, my voice steady. My mom's expression hardened. "You think you can just cut us out? After everything we've done for you?" I laughed bitterly. "Everything you've done for me? You mean the years of insults? The jokes about my skin? The way you made me feel like I'd never be good enough?" My dad stood up, glaring. "We raised you. We paid for your education." "Yeah, because you chose to have me," I shot back. "You don't get a medal for doing the bare minimum as parents. You never gave me love. You gave me shame. And now you think you can force your way into my wedding?" "No." My grandmother scoffed. "You'll regret this one day. Family is everything." "Family is supposed to make you feel safe and loved," I said. "Not small and broken. You've never been my family." The room went silent, finally. I took a deep breath and said, "If you show up at my wedding, I will call the police." This is my life, my future, and I'm not letting you ruin it." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out. Jacob followed me, his hand on my back, steady and comforting. When we got home, I broke down. All the years of hurt, anger, and frustration came pouring out. Jacob held me as I cried, letting me get it all out, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The week leading up to the wedding was a blur. Between finalizing last-minute details and making sure everything was set, I barely had time to think about my family. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but worry. Were they really gone? Or were they still planning something? Jacob and I stayed vigilant. We made sure security at the venue knew who to keep out and shared pictures of my parents and grandmother with the hotel staff. Part of me felt ridiculous for going to such lengths, but after everything they'd done, I wasn't taking any chances. The day of the wedding arrived, and honestly, it was perfect. I'll never forget the feeling of standing at the end of the aisle, looking at Jacob. He was grinning at me like I was the most beautiful person he'd ever seen, and for the first time I believed it. Walking toward him, I felt the weight of my past slipping away. The years of insults, the shame, the self-doubt. It all faded with every step I took. This was my moment, our moment, and guess what? My parents never showed up. They didn't crash the wedding. They didn't cause a scene. I kept waiting for something to happen, but it never did. By the time Jacob and I exchanged vows, I realized that I was truly free. After the ceremony, we shared photos online. I wasn't trying to rub it in anyone's face. I was just happy and wanted to share that joy. A few days later, Olivia reached out to me through social media. I'd blocked her number, but apparently, she wasn't done trying to apologize. "I'm really sorry for everything," she wrote. "I shouldn't have gone along with Mom and Grandma. I see that now. I hope you can forgive me someday." I sat there staring at her message, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to respond, but another part of me felt exhausted. I wasn't ready to forgive her yet. I typed out a short reply. "Thanks for the message. I need time." And that was it. Some people in my family tried to guilt me into forgiving everyone. They sent messages saying things like, "But they're your parents," or "Family is forever." I ignored them. I'd spent my whole life trying to fit into a family that never accepted me. I wasn't about to go back to that. A few days after the wedding, I got an email from my parents. It was short and cold. "We're disowning you. You won't be included in our will. Don't contact us again." I laughed when I read it. It was so predictable. Honestly, I'd never expected to inherit anything from them anyway. Everything good was going to Olivia. I hit delete and didn't give it another thought. Jacob and I packed our bags and left for our honeymoon. A cozy little trip to the mountains, just the two of us. One night, as we sat by the fire in our cabin, I turned to him and said, "I don't know if I'll ever fully get over it." "You don't have to," he said. "You just have to move forward." And that's exactly what I'm doing. The truth is, I'm happier than I've ever been. I have people in my life who love me for who I am. I have a partner who makes me feel beautiful, inside and out. And as for my family, they're in the rearview mirror, right where they belong. I've learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about love, respect, and acceptance. And I've built that for myself with Jacob. So, no, I don't regret not inviting them to my wedding. I don't regret cutting them off. If anything, I wish I'd done it sooner. Story 2. I called off the engagement and severed my relationship with my family, since my fiancé insisted that I adopt her last name and break off all links with them because they didn't suit their social standing. I am a 28-year-old member of a close-knit Italian-American family that owns a chain of prosperous eateries. 3 generations of my family have left a culinary heritage, beginning with my grandpa, who came to this country with nothing but his recipes and a strong will. Since I was old enough to wash dishes, I have worked in our restaurants, and I currently oversee 2 of our busiest sites. My 26-year-old fiancée and I first met 3 years ago when she was a patron of one of our eateries. She worked as a marketing executive for a large company and was intelligent and driven. Between us, everything happened fast. There was no denying the chemistry. We moved in together within a year, and I proposed 6 months ago. Things began to alter at that point. In her remarks, she criticized the oppressive and outdated custom of women taking their husbands' last names. I acknowledged her point of view and informed her that she may continue using her last name if she so desired, but that was insufficient. In fact, she remarked, "I want you to take my last name," during dinner one evening. "I am an only kid, and my family name is fading. There are several boys in your family to continue the name." Despite my surprise, I made an effort to have a rational conversation. I described the significance of my family name to our restaurant's tradition and identity. "We could rebrand the restaurants," she said, dismissing this. She branded me sexist and accused me of holding on to antiquated traditions when I brought up my cultural heritage and the significance of these rituals in Italian households. From then, the demands became more intense. After marriage, she started to push that we go across the nation to California, where her parents resided. She said that this was my chance to escape the confining influence of my family when I brought up the fact that I was unable to quit the family company. She would reply, "Your family controls your life too much. You must start prioritizing me." Last week, over a meal with both of our families, things reached a breaking point. I had been reluctant to publicize the name change and move, but she had been pressuring me to do so. She washed the glass halfway through supper to draw everyone's attention. Ignoring my startled expression, she said, "We have some exciting news. We're relocating to California after the wedding to start a new chapter in our lives. My prospective spouse has consented to adopt my family name." The ensuing hush was deafening. My brothers and dad gave me a startled look. None of this had been agreed to by me. She went on before I could say anything more, speaking straight to my family. "For the first year of our marriage, we will also be restricting our contact with extended relatives since we believe it's critical to forge our own identities as a couple. It is a standard procedure that marital counselors advise." My father's look stiffened, and my mother's face sank. After muttering something under his breath, my younger brother left the table. In contrast, her parents were beaming with pride. As I watched this nightmare play out, I became aware that the person I believed to be familiar was actually revealing her true nature. These announcements had recently been made by her without my permission. She had planned this public ambush just to coerce me into complying. When we were by ourselves after dinner, I went up to her. What was the purpose of that? None of those items were ever approved to by us. She gave an eye roll. I had to push the problem. "You could never confront your family by yourself. For us, this is the finest option. Either best for you or best for us. You didn't even talk to me about this when I asked. Without consulting me, you just took these important decisions for our lives. Either I knew you wouldn't agree differently." She lost her temper. "You are so dependent on your family that you are unable to think for yourself." The problem needed to be taken over by someone. She gave her ultimatum at that point. She would cancel the wedding, or I would promise to take her name and break off relations with my family. She undoubtedly assumed that I would have to give in because of this. Rather, I experienced an odd feeling of clarity. I responded softly, "You're correct about one thing. It is necessary to cancel this wedding." In a split second, her expression changed from arrogant to shocked. "What?" I got up and said, "We're done. To feed your ego, I won't allow you to cut me off from my family or destroy who I am." Her response was explosive. "I can't be subjected to this." She let out a scream. "I've sent it out already. Remember the dates." "I've made vendor reservations. Deposits have cost my family thousands of dollars. You need to have considered it before attempting to control me," I answered, keeping my composure. "I'll reimburse your family for any missed deposits." She instantly changed her strategy, her rage turning to tears. "I'm sorry, baby. I simply overreacted. This means so lot to me, you know. We can resolve this." After I finished, I could see every effort at manipulation for what it was because the curtain had been lifted. I began grabbing my laptop, some clothes, papers, and other necessities. She alternated between threatening and begging as she followed me about the flat. She then revealed the true bombshell. "All right, do you want the truth? I never intended to spend only a year in touch with your family. After the wedding, I was going to make sure we didn't see them again." I paused my packing and looked at her. "What? We are superior to your family," she spat. "My parents belong to some of California's most exclusive social circles. Did you truly believe that I would be embarrassed in front of my friends by your immigrant family? God, your father's heavy accent and the way your mother dresses." Before I could reply, my anger began to boil at the utter disdain in her words. She went on. "I planned to make sure we were too busy to attend too many significant social gatherings, charity galas, and private parties when we got married and relocated to California. Your family wouldn't be accepted. You would have eventually moved on from them and accepted my reality." After she phoned her parents, they arrived at our flat an hour later, prepared to mediate. Her father made an effort to act like the sensible negotiator. "Let's talk like adults, son," he remarked. "My kid is from a certain socioeconomic class. We have to keep up appearances. You must be able to comprehend what I understand, right?" I responded by saying that you brought up a daughter who believes it's okay to make fun of immigrants and despise hardworking people because they don't belong to your privileged social circle. Her mom snarled. "We're not elitists. We just think that persons from comparable backgrounds should be married. The culture of your family just differs greatly from ours." It was breathtaking, the thinly veiled bias. They talked about my family as though we were a shameful secret that needed to be kept concealed. My fiancé had always insisted on holding family get-togethers in restaurants rather than at our house. All of those justifications for my parents' inability to meet her pals. Now everything made clear. I said, gathering my belongings, "I'm going. Never try to get in touch with me again." One more desperate attempt was made by my fiancé. "The upper society will never accept your family," she gave a smirk. "Instead of advancing globally, you choose to remain in your own ethnic bubble." I faced each of them again. No, I'm eschewing discrimination and shame in favor of love and acceptance. At least my family doesn't make assumptions about individuals based on their origins or accents, even though they might not be your idea of high society. Their expressions were priceless. There was no turning back now that they had fully revealed their true selves. That evening, I went straight to my brother's house after leaving the flat. After glancing at my face, he realized that something was very wrong. He simply nodded and replied, "I never liked her anyway," after I told him everything. The days that followed were chaotic. The smear campaign began when my ex-fiancé posted on social media about how I had abused her family's trust and abandoned her. She deliberately omitted the bits about her genuine views on immigration and her desire for me to sever my links with my family. I started receiving abusive messages from her buddy. I guess I was a wimp for not stepping up and taking advantage of her family's kind invitation to become a member of their social circle. Some even said I should be thankful that I was ever considered for marriage by someone of her caliber. The worst thing, though, was when she unexpectedly showed up at my parents' place. In an attempt to win my mother's compassion, she brought her mother along. My mother was in the midst of making Sunday supper when they discovered her. Her apron was floured. The aroma of her renowned lasagna filled the kitchen. Her mother remarked condescendingly, "We just want to understand. Perhaps this wouldn't be a problem if your family made a greater effort to blend in and become more American." At last, my mother, who had been silent up until that point, spoke out. "I'm American," she asserted. 30 years ago, I became a citizen. This is where my kids were born. However, becoming American does not imply forgetting our heritage or identity. My mother wasn't done when my ex tried to interrupt. I had nothing when I arrived in this nation. No friends, no money, no English. However, I was proud of my culture. I can't let anyone take that away, and my kids won't lose it to anyone. Then she accomplished something of which I was really pleased. In her slurred English, she indicated the door. "Go out of my house now. I don't have time for those who believe they are superior to others, and my sauce is boiling," my mother murmured and gave me a hard embrace when they went. "Son, you made the proper decision." After a week, my brothers and I returned to our flat to get the remaining items. She was waiting, but this time she tried one final trick, rather than threatening or crying. "I was mistaken," she remarked quietly. "I'll take in your relatives. Once a month we can join them for supper. They may even visit California on occasion. Don't discard what we have, please." Now, though, all I could see in her eyes was the disdain with which she had ridiculed my father's accent. She said that my family would make her feel ashamed, and that was all I could hear. Certain things cannot be hidden once they are made public. "No," I answered plainly. I deserve to be loved for who I am, including my ancestry and family. Furthermore, my family is worthy of better than someone who considers them a source of shame. I felt a sense of relief as I left the flat for the last time. Yes, calling off the wedding was costly and inconvenient. Yes, some of our shared acquaintances supported her and stopped talking to me, but I had kept my familial ties and my sense of self-worth, which are far more precious than money or social connections. I'm concentrating on getting better and getting back in touch with my origins right now, each Sunday. My mother is teaching me old family recipes while I assist her in the kitchen at family dinner at my parents' house. When my father shares tales of his early years in Italy, I pay more attention this time, and am struck by how resilient he was to start over in a foreign nation. I occasionally reflect on how nearly I lost everything: the coziness of family get-togethers, the pride in our ancestry, and the unwavering acceptance and affection. My ex believed she was giving me a better life, but in reality, she was asking me to exchange something valuable for merely being a member of the social elite.